Peace. We all have the right to our preferences, right? Word up. We're reviewing and we're talking about the 30-year anniversary of ATLiens by OutKast today, right? But I'm prejudiced. There's no doubt that I discriminate, you know, and you don't have to agree with me. That's fine. Post your opinions in the comments, right? The thing is, though, is that we all can feel how we feel, and I feel a type of way when it comes to non-East Coast hip-hop, right? Everybody remembers that's my age. And some people liked it, but most people didn't, right? I still remember my homeboys. I don't got a horse in the race like I always say when it comes to Jerry Curl, pointing, having jokes for West Coast motherfuckers. I remember 1987, and you can't fucking pull the wool over my eyes, man. I remember, right, when Eazy-E came out with the Boys in the Hood shit, and he said, woke up quick at about noon. At the same time, when that fucking slowpoke shit was going on, no, it's not a myth that if you try to riff or get with the man with the giving gift of gab or vocab, I only ignore. Be sleeping on your rhymes till I sought to snore. You can't awake me, even make me fear you, son, cause you can't do me none. You know, Kane was saying that shit while Eazy-E was doing woke up quick at about noon. Just know I gotta get it in content soon. Sounded like some remedial parents sign the EIEP paper shit. It sounded like some short bus shit. We can face it now. We were against. We listened to the shit on Yo MTV Raps or on the radio. We'd hear some shit coming from Miami, right? Whether it was back then Luke Skywalker, right? Whatever it was always fucking light years behind the East Coast. It was always light years behind New York, light years behind New Jersey, light years behind Philly. That's the discrimination I was raised on by black folks, by black hip hop listeners. You don't have to remember, if you weren't part of it, you're not part of it. But I know some of you guys were part of it. Y'all don't want to hear shit if it wasn't coming from the Northeast. And so, like I've mentioned before, Cypress Hill, NWA, people had jokes for NWA too. But that started to guide us into respecting West Coast hip hop and other places. But look, there was a great divide, right? There was the Moshe parted the Red Sea. And some of us said, okay, we're going to open our minds to this stuff. And others said, fuck that shit, right? And I was always the fuck that shit kind of guy, right? When it came to anything. I don't want to hear about fucking Juvenile. I didn't care about Ice Cream Man by Master P, you know, because 1996, I mean, that's when Jigga, right, really first dropped, right? 1996 is when Redman dropped Muddy Waters. 1996 is when New Jersey's Wyclef and Lauryn Hill brought out The Score, right? The fuck do I care about this down south country shit? Some of us would say we like the style, right, of stuff that was coming from Miami or stuff that was coming from out of state, stuff that was coming from the West Coast, stuff that was coming from, you know, rap a lot, right? We're opening our minds to certain things. But it was always a talk about either the style, the slang, or the content that cats would have jokes, right? And then here comes OutKast with their first joint, right? And then people started opening their eyes, right? Because they addressed it like, motherfucker, we can rap and we do have content, right? They say it right here. And they talk about drop bombs, right? And anybody from the East Coast knows where that reference comes from. That comes from Knowledge of Self. 5% Nation of Gods and Earth, 5% Nation of Islam. Dropping a bomb means everything changes afterwards, right? This is not too long after the article The Bomb was published, right? And here they are from down south using our slang. But the funny shit is they're using the term fuck shit all the way back in 30 years ago, right? That didn't really pick up in the East Coast until maybe 15 or 20 years ago, right? So some of it is piggybacking off the stuff that we were saying, and then other of it is introducing new words and new vernacular to the hip-hop vocabulary that those of us just walking and talking on the East Coast weren't familiar with. There was no internet, right? There's no way to communicate. This shit was partly foreign to us when it came out, and it doesn't stop being foreign with the lyrics and with the delivery. It's just as foreign when it comes to the instrumentation and the production. Word is bond. Let me show you how. As you go down the track list, ATLiens, Wheelz of Steel, right? All that, right? You keep going down the track list 2 and 3, you're gonna notice something about the production. Now, they're using fucking drum machines, they're using samples, they're using some beats, but for the most part, they're using instruments. and keyboards, right? And that's something that's far out. Think about any one of these producers that you love from the 90s. Anyone, name them. Prince Paul, RZA, Pete Rock, right? And look, anybody, you can stretch as far as you want to. Jay Swift, right? They're all using predominantly samples, right? And Muggs, okay? So the thing is, you got everybody using samples on one side in the East Coast, right? Almost never using anything but samples, right? Because we moved away from that on the East Coast. Because if you were using a keyboard or an instrument back in like 1990, 1991, 92, 93, they're gonna laugh your ass out of the studio and say, the fucking freak stopped coming out at night 10 years ago, motherfucker. Take that shit somewhere else. There's a prejudice, a probably well-deserved prejudice, about beats that are using non-sampled stuff, because at one point it was so corny that we had to move into samples. I remember when Rakim and Eric B and Rakim dropped their joint. I remember when the Cold Chillin' records and Marley Marl started producing, right? Anybody who's fucking around with that prehistoric drum machine keyboard shit can get fucked, and we all know it. Not only are they rapping in a different way, not only is their content something that's mysterious as us to the goddamn, Shaolin Mountain Kung Fu flicks, but they're using instruments. And it just, examples keep on going and going. When you hear the elevator, right? Elevators, right? Listen to that snare. That wasn't common for the era that was forming on the East Coast post-boom bap after 1994. This shit, a little echo, this wasn't happening, right? And if it was, you better use it right. And then you got a crawling bass line. You're not hearing this on stuff that's coming out of New York. Very well received, right? Very well received. And poetic, deep, complex, right? Done with purpose, right? This album hits all the notes, but it's my least favorite out of all the shit. Even It Was Written, which I thought was not the best possible follow-up to Illmatic, right? A lot of people loved it. Of course, I love some of the songs on there, but it didn't follow in the path that I was assuming they would go. I mean, Wrath of the Math, J. Rue the Damager, he stuck to the script, and he followed Sunrise in the East. He followed that exactly as you'd imagine he would, right? But Nas started to go in a little bit of a different direction with his follow-up. See, I never properly gave these guys a chance, right? I would shun anything that came from other places. In terms of like, I didn't do it. I couldn't do it. I couldn't fucking budge, right? I stuck to the script. I stayed, in line. And you know what? Even when my homeboys were drinking gin and sipping on gin and juice, laid back with their mind on their money and their money on their mind, I just didn't follow suit. I've always been a diehard East Coast hip hop fan. So I would love to say that now that I've given this ATLiens by OutKast another listen, that I found and I discovered something by listening to it that I missed when I was younger. And now that my mind is open further, I've gotten a little older and more mature, that I'm ready to receive this brilliance. And I'm telling you, I can tell these dudes are talented. I can tell these guys bring something to the table. A lot of East Coast rappers that I grew up listening to didn't. Right? I still don't fucking like it. I couldn't wait to turn it off. I immediately shut off the ATLiens after refamiliarizing myself with it today on my run, and I put on You God keynote speaker, and I loved every second of it, right? I just can't change, maybe you can't teach an old dog new tricks, but I'll never listen to it again. So it's listed on many lists, one of the top 2, top 3 albums that came out in 1996, and I just couldn't disagree more. There's, even if how far do you have to duck down to reach for Philadelphia Half-Life, right? Or anything else that came out that year. Even Keith Murray Enigma, I would prefer to this album, as far as 96 is concerned. And I understand that I'm wrong to a lot of people. They just don't agree. They think that this is brilliant work, and I think people are entitled to that. But I once read an article, I think it was in Spin Magazine in the mid to late 90s, and the Beastie Boys were talking about touring with Biz Markie. I thought this can be interesting. I'll never forget something they said about Biz. They said that they would go to these fancy restaurants with Cuz, and they would have all the money. Biz wasn't hurting for dough. Like, he could afford a nice fancy meal. He preferred to stop at 7-Eleven first and get one of those 7-Eleven hamburgers that they used to sell in the refrigerator back in the 90s. You microwave it. He preferred the taste of that over the taste of the fancy restaurant. And that's kind of how I feel about, other hip hop that came out this year and OutKast ATLiens is, this is definitely high quality musicianship, well written songs, well thought out, well performed, and it can still get fucked when it comes to Keith Murray's Sloppy Enigma album. Maybe people say you just won't understand that down south culture, and maybe they're right. But this album, and nothing else I've ever really heard, has really given me the appetite to understand it. And look, anybody that sat and listened to the Ghetto Boys Can't Be Stopped, right? They've listened to that album feeling a little bit like a foreigner, a little bit like a tourist, right? Because the cultures, even though we're in the same country, vary so much, especially pre-internet, that a lot of this felt like listening to foreigners, even if they were only a couple hours drive away. Am I the only one who feels that way? Anyway, this has been OutKast ATLiens, right? And we're going to be coming back in about another week, I think, with Poor Righteous Teacher's Pure Poverty, which came out exactly 35 years ago. Let me know if you like the Anniversary series. I'll be back.